Okay, so today we're going to review how to factor by grouping. So factoring by grouping is a very important skill to have when you are factoring polynomials with a degree greater than 2. So when we have a polynomial with a degree of 2, we have a quadratic. So an example of this is x squared minus x minus 12. Okay, so how do we factor this expression? So what we're going to do is we're going to find terms that multiply up to 12 and terms that add up to -1. So in order to do this, we first find the factors of -12. Okay, so that would be 4 and 3. Then we have 4 and -4 and 3. We have 4 and -3. We have 6 and -2, -6 and 2, -12 and 1, and then 12 and 1. All right, so now that we have terms that multiply up to -12, we want to find out which one of these terms adds up to -1. So -4 plus 3 is -1. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's add up all the other terms. So 4 minus 3 is 1, so that doesn't work. 6 minus 2 is 4. That doesn't work. -6 plus 2 is -4. That doesn't work. -12 plus 1 is -11. That doesn't work. 12 plus 1, well, 12 plus 12 minus 1 is 11. That does not work. So this tells us that -4 and 3 are factors of 12 that multiply up to -12 and that add up to -1. So now we're going to rewrite our expression as x. So -4 and x plus 3. So that's very simple, very straightforward, right? We have our terms. We factor them out by finding our GCF. And we find two factors that multiply up to our C term and that add up to our B term. So it helps when I have the general form of a quadratic. So that is ax squared plus bx plus c. So we want two factors that multiply up to c and two factors that add up to b. So these are general terms. But it becomes difficult to do this when we have a polynomial with more than 3 terms and with a degree higher than 2. So here's a great example. We have 8r cubed minus 64r squared plus r minus 8. Here we go. Here's we have a cubic term here with more than 3 terms. We have 4 terms here, and we want to factor this out. We want to find the roots of this polynomial, and that's what factoring is. So in order to do this, we first want to draw a gate, and this gate will allow us to distinguish. Let me draw it in a different color here. It's going to allow us to break up this term into sets of 2. By doing this, we now have common terms on the left side and common terms on the right side that we can factor out. So by using this gate, we can factor out polynomials by grouping. So we're grouping them up into sets of 2. So we have, let's say we have 4 triangles. Okay, we have 2 friends. How many triangles does each friend get? Oh, we break it up. So you get 2 triangles and you get 2 triangles. Great. So we're basically breaking it up. with this division line. I'll continue with red. All right, so what we now want to do is we want to find the greatest common factor of 8r cubed minus 64r squared. This may seem intimidating, but it's very straightforward. What is the biggest factor of 8 and 64? What is the biggest number that multiplies into both terms? So take a second and think about that. So pause the video, take a moment to do that. Okay, so we know that 8 is our greatest common factor because 8 times 1 is 8 and 8 times 8 is 64. So now we need to factor out our r terms. So we have an r cubed, so we have an r to the power of 3 and an r squared. What do they both have in common? What can we both pull out? So take a moment and think about this. Okay, so they both have an r squared, right? Because r cubed written in terms of r squared is r squared times r. And r squared written in terms of r squared is r squared times 1. So we can pull out an r squared from both, and we would be left with r, for adding here, plus 1. Because to check this, we just distribute r squared. So r squared times r is r cubed, and r times 1 is r squared. So now we can apply this knowledge to this part. So we can factor out an r squared. So 8r squared, what do we have to multiply 8r squared to get 8r cubed? It's just r. All right, because 8r squared times r squared times r is r cubed. We have the 8 that carries. So then we now want to find a term that when you multiply it by 8r squared gives you 64r squared. So we're not multiplying by an r because we start with r squared and we end with r squared, but we start with 8 and end with 64. So what do we have to multiply 8 by to get 64? 8. Great. So now the next step is very, very important. It helps us solve this. So now what I'm going to do is put r minus 8. We do this because we need the terms in the parentheses to be equal. They have to be equal. This is the essence of factoring by grouping, because the next step is going to allow us to factor out the term in the parentheses, pull it out from both terms, and we take the remaining two terms, so we write that in a different color, and we put them together. So let's find that remaining term. So what number multiplies by r minus 8 to get r minus 8? It's very straightforward, 1. So now we determine our sign. So our sign is positive. Because positive 1 times r is r, positive 1 times negative 8 is negative 8. So now we get to, I'll write this in a different color, factor out our r minus 8 from both sides. And what are we left with? 8r squared plus 1. So in this case, we have a plus, so we cannot factor this any further. And we also cannot factor this term further. So now we are left with our final solution, r minus 8 times 8r squared plus 1. And we don't have to make it equal to 0 because I explicitly said in the beginning of the video that we're going to be factoring this expression. Expressions are not equal to a value. Equations are equal to a term like 0 or 1 or 10. So let's go over a second problem. So number 2, we'll do this in purple for fun. So we have 12p cubed minus 21p squared plus 28p minus 49. Okay, so if you think you can do this, try this problem out on your own and see how far you can get. So pause the video now and try. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is bring in our gate. We're going to split this into two sets of 2. So I'm going to use blank to make this very significant. We're going to break it up into 2 terms. Okay? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a term that multiplies into 12p cubed minus 21p squared. So we're going to find the greatest common factor. So what term multiplies into 12 and into negative 21? So just take a moment to think about that. If you have to, write the factors of 12 and 21 out. So the greatest common factor is 3, because 12 divided by 3 ends up being 4, and 21 divided by 3 is 7. So now what about this p? Again, like the problem beforehand, we have a p cubed and a p squared. So what are we going to do? We're going to factor out a p squared. So now, what do we have to multiply this term by to get 12p cubed? Well, we have to multiply it by 4, because 3 times 4 is 12, and you carry the p squared. Oh, so it'll actually be p, because p squared times p will give you p cubed. All right, so now we're going to subtract. Now 3 times what gives you 21? Take a moment. That value should be 7. And p squared times 1 will give you p squared. So we don't multiply anything with the 7. No p. So now immediately write your parentheses and do 4p minus 7. Again, I cannot stress this more. These terms in the parentheses have to be equal. If they are not equal, you will not be able to factor your term by grouping. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to find out what number do we have to multiply 4p by to get 28p. So 4p times x equals 28p. So what is that term? This term ends up being, after just take a moment to think about it, 7. So 4p times 7 gives you 28p. So what about negative 7? Negative 7 times x equals negative 49. So let's try our 7. So negative 7 times 7 equals, you guessed it, negative 49. So I'm just going to quickly erase this. Just give me a moment. Un momento, as they say in Spanish. All right, so now we know that it is 7. And to determine our sign, 7 times 4, positive 7 times 4 gives us our 28. Positive 7 times our negative 7 gives us our negative 49. So our sign is positive. So now what do? We factor out our term in the parentheses. We bring it out. So we have 4p minus 7 times 7 plus 3p squared. And again, we cannot factor any further. Okay, I'm going to try 2 more problems, and then I'll assign the rest of the problems to you. So the third problem states, let's do it in a different color. Let's say this baby blue. So the third problem says 12x cubed plus 2x squared minus 30x minus 5. All right, so the first thing we're going to do, remember, always draw your gate. We're going to break up the terms into groups of 2. That's essentially what factoring by grouping is. The next step, we're going to find the greatest common factor in this term. So what multiplies into 12x cubed and 2x cubed? What can we pull out of them? Okay, so just take a moment to think about that. Try the problem yourself and then see how far you can get before continuing on. So now, here's what we're going to do. We're going to factor out a 2. because that's the greatest constant that goes into 12 and 2. And again, like before, we have the x squared, because we have an x squared here and an x squared times x there, which is x cubed, right? So we have essentially x squared times x plus x squared. That leads us to get this. So these are equivalent. These two equals signs. Okay, I'm just gonna move that away. Okay, so now we have our 2x squared out. So what do we have to multiply? 2x squared to get 12x cubed. So what times 2 will give you 12? That value is 6. And x times what will give you x cubed? That value is x. Okay, then we just pull out 1, because 2x squared times 1 will give you 2x squared. Then again, 6x plus 1. We don't even care about the sign or the term yet. These in the parentheses have to be equal. Okay, so what times 6 will get you negative 30? Negative 5, right? 6, well, negative 30x. So 6x times negative 5 will be 6 times 5 is negative 30. 6 times negative 5 is negative 30. And you carry the x. Perfect. So now, what do you have to multiply 1 by to get negative 5? Well, you have to multiply by negative 5, of course. So that tells us that negative 5 is our term on the outside. So then, once again, we factor out what's in the parentheses. So we have 6x plus 1 times 2x squared minus 5. And once again, there's no more factoring we could do. Okay, so that's our final answer. And as our last problem together, very sad. Let's see how green looks. Green looks legible. All right, so we're going to start using v's. 6v cubed minus 16v squared plus 21v minus 56. All right, so to factor out this expression, I want you to try on your own, see how far you can get, and after that, resume the video and we will work on it together. All right, awesome. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw my gate. So our greatest common factor in here is 2 for our constants and v squared for our variables. So 2 times 3 will give us 6. V squared times v will give us v cubed. So 2 times negative 8 will give us negative 16. And v squared times 1 will give us v squared, so we leave that alone. All right, quickly, in your parentheses, 3v minus 8, that should not change. Now, what is going to change is our value here. So now, 21v minus 56, that's our term. So what do you have to multiply 3 by to get 21? 7, right? Because you have your 3v times 7 will equal 21v. So what about negative 8? Negative 8 times 7 will equal negative 56. So there you go. We got from this term to this term by multiplying by a sweet 7. A sweet positive 7 in that case. All right. With that, we're going to factor out what's in our parentheses. Awesome. And now we're going to factor out the remaining terms. And there we go. We now have our factored polynomial. And that is factoring by grouping. So let's go over the steps. So, I'll write these in black because they're important. No funny business. So, step 1. Add your gate. Splitting the terms into 2. Into 2 groups. All right, great. So we're going to add our division bar, add our gate. Step 2, find the GCF. Define the greatest common factor for each group I write it in big because you want to factor out the terms in the group, because that's very, very, very important for each group. So then you have your parentheses, right? You have your term in the parentheses. So you want to have your term within your parentheses. I can't really write parentheses, that word's too complex, but in your parentheses. So in our previous problems case, we're going to want to take these two terms in our parentheses and make sure they're equal. And add it to the other side of the gate. Okay? Because I found the 3v minus 8, I quickly move that to this side of the gate because these have to be equal. These two terms have to be equal. And then, as our step 4, you find the value that makes the parentheses, the term in the parentheses, I'll give it a go, parentheses. Find the value that makes the term in the parentheses equal to the original term on the right side of the gate. I know I spelled original wrong. All right, so to re-explain, we found our value in the parentheses, and we want to know what do you have to multiply the value in your parentheses by to get your original term on the right side of your gate, because we work from left to right. So we found the term on your left side of the gate, which should be equal to your term in the parentheses on the right side of the gate. So I'll just put L for left, R for right, and then as 5, you factor out your term in the parentheses. In the parentheses and multiply it by the remaining terms. I'm going to say rem terms, but you get the point. So our remaining terms, we factored out the 3v minus 8. Here it is. Woo. And now we're going to take, I'll write this in a different color, our two remaining terms, and we're going to combine them, which gave us our second part of our term. And that is how you factor by grouping. So this is going to be a very important skill in the Regents. So I have more practice problems I'm going to send to you, and I have their numbers. Try them out, see how you feel. I have a worked out form on it with me that you will get tomorrow. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for watching.